I want to open this podcast by noting that we're recording on Monday, December 15th. Many people are coming to us today in the wake of the horrifying news this weekend in Australia, and with it, a heightened sense of concern about anti-Semitism and Jewish safety in public and communal spaces. Before we talk about the events of this weekend, I'd like to introduce our guest, my friend, Representative Simon Cataldo of Concord, who was elected to the Massachusetts House in 2022. On November 30th, Rep. Cataldo concluded his tenure as the House co-chair appointed by the Speaker to lead the first in the nation legislatively established Special Commission on Combating Antisemitism. As most of you already know, I was proud to be appointed by the Senate President to serve on the commission, which we at JCRC worked to establish last year along with our partners and allies on Beacon Hill. And it was a genuine pleasure to serve under the leadership of Chair Cataldo and his Senate colleague, Chair John Velas. I will note that we would have loved to have had Chair John Velas with us today, but he is currently serving our country on active duty as a member of the Army Reserve. But we did want to sit down now, just weeks after the Commission published our report, to learn more about what is there and what the work looks like going forward. So welcome, Chair Cataldo.
Jeremy, thank you so much, and feel free to use Simon.
Okay, I'm going to say it up front. Those of us at JCRC, particularly since you served on the JCRC Council before you were elected to the House, we take a lot of pride in the titles you hold and love celebrating them with you.
Fair enough.
Before we go forward with talking about the commission, as noted, we planned to sit down and have this conversation several weeks ago. And here we are, at least 15 people murdered from the ages of 10 to 87 and dozens more wounded at a celebration of Chanukah. Moments like this can make all of us feel more vulnerable. That's understandable. And at the same time, these are the moments that raise important questions. Yesterday, I wrote about how this holiday celebrates Jewish resilience and defiance, our commitment to publicly shining a light and declaring our Jewish pride. Folks have been expressing back to me, in particular, that one line of my note resonated, and I'll quote it. "We refuse to be deterred by anti-Semitism in all its forms. We appreciate the solidarity and support of our civic leaders who understand that it is society's obligation and not ours to protect our gatherings and our safety." That's a big part of why this conversation about the work of the Massachusetts Special Commission and our report matters so much, because we are talking about how the whole of society can and is taking anti-Semitism, at least as we experience it in Massachusetts, seriously and with commitment. As Governor Healy said yesterday, to Jewish families in Massachusetts and around the world, you are not alone in your grief or fear. We will continue to stand with you and be clear that anti-Semitism has no place here. And we certainly welcome messages like that from our governor and all of our civic leaders in the last 24 hours. Chair Cataldo, Simon, welcome again. Your thoughts in this moment, both as a leader on this issue and as a member of our Jewish community.
Thanks so much for having me on to the podcast, a podcast that I've listened to a bunch of times and that I think is contributing a really important perspective on what everything that's happening right now in our world, certainly centering on our Jewish community. When folks reach out to me, and I think in particular because of my public position over the last year or so, it has been a lot of people who have been reaching out to me about an incident that happened halfway across the world or all the way across the world. I have a few thoughts. First of all, people should pay attention to what Jewish leaders say now. You contributed what I think is a really helpful statement in some advice or suggestions to folks who are committed to going out on social media or whatever their platform is and talking about these issues, in particular non-Jewish people. It's important that folks listen to that advice, and I see that happening. And to be more specific, I am seeing non-Jewish leaders in government and in civic life speaking up in response to this shooting that happened in Australia, and doing it using the language that we have advocated for, saying the words Jew, Jewish, anti-Semitism in relation to an event that is clearly targeted at Jews who are celebrating Hanukkah, essential. something that we haven't been seeing, but it's something that we talked about quite a bit on the special commission. And, I think probably as a defense mechanism, a lot of us look for silver linings. That is one that I'm seeing right now. Another thing that I say to folks is, if you're looking for something to do right now to show solidarity, go to a menorah lighting. We have an increasing number of menorah lightings in communities. Municipalities are holding them, including in my district, and all over the state. You went to one recently. The governor was there, and that's great that she was there, and that other leaders were there. Go to one of those and show that solidarity. And when you're there, thank the police for keeping everyone safe, because as you said, it's not just the responsibility of the Jewish people to protect Jews or protect any other minority. It's a whole of society, whole of community approach. And a key stakeholder in that is our law enforcement, which I think has been a great partner in Massachusetts over the last several years amid a rising tide of anti-Semitism.
That's well said. And this podcast will be dropping in the middle of Chanukah. We're going to get it out fast. So there are menorah lightings going on all over the Commonwealth, as you noted. You can also go to jewishboston.com. There's a listing of many, many of these events happening all through next Sunday night, the 21st of December. And all you have to do is just show up at one of them to be in solidarity with your neighbors. Before we go any further, and I want to take the opportunity, because it's a delight to have you in our offices sitting down to talk about the work you've been doing, I want to give people in our JCRC community a chance to know a little bit about who you are, Simon Cataldo of Concord, which you love reminding people of, and how you came to public service.
I will go chronologically.
Okay.
I was raised in West Concord by a Jewish mother, non-Jewish father, but was raised in an unapologetically Jewish household. Attended Kerem Shalom Synagogue. Was bar mitzvahed there growing up, and went to public schools K through 12 in Concord. Great place to grow up. Went to college in Colorado, studied environmental science there, and then became a teacher at a large public middle and high school called Frederick Douglass Academy in Harlem, New York City. And that's where my public service journey started. I was assigned to teach high school chemistry. I had been a science major and did my teacher training, got my certification in that through Teach for America. And that was all going great. Taught summer school. The kids were learning. They liked being in my classroom. And then 4 days before school started, I was introduced as the new special education 7th and 8th grade math teacher. And it was a disaster in my classroom, total disaster, not even safe. The security guards stopped answering my calls by Thanksgiving. And I was going to quit, and then I decided to start a lacrosse team, the first lacrosse team at a public middle school in Harlem. And everything changed for me, changed for my class. They ended up getting the highest increases in their state exam test scores in the school district for former low-level performers. And so this is part of certainly what made me into the person I am today, in the sense that I'm somebody who not just values and enjoys, but believes in the power of public service, and went on to become a federal prosecutor doing public corruption prosecutions at the Justice Department and out of Washington, D.C., but all over the country. And after that, I ended up kind of fortuitously running for office, and am a state rep now, and absolutely love my job.
That's great. Thank you. It's such an opportunity for people to know who are the rising leaders in our community on Beacon Hill. And I think that's important and part of this. So let's start with the creation of the commission. And, you were certainly one of our partners in the House who actively communicated with your colleagues to share with them why you thought it was important that the House embrace the proposal to create the commission. I wouldn't say you lobbied, but you certainly encourage your colleagues to see the work and see what you were hoping to have in the work. And then quickly after the governor signed the legislation, Speaker Mariano named you as the House co-chair, and note again with a certain amount of pride, named you as the House co-chair of a commission in your freshman term in the House, which is really quite remarkable, and a real commitment into you and your leadership in this space. So what were you hoping going into all of that this commission would do? And what did you set out to achieve by taking on the co-chair of the commission?
I want to answer your question, but I want to just dial it back in time just a little bit, because I think there's an aspect of this that is definitely something that can map on to a lot of folks who are listening and how they view their own contribution as a Jewish person who may not be in professional Jewish life right now, their contribution to their Jewish community. You know, when I was elected as a legislator, I didn't see myself as being elected as a Jewish legislator. I was a Jewish person who happened to believe in public service and believe in the power of good government, in part because of my Jewish values, but certainly not as an openly Jewish legislator. I was the first Jewish person to be elected at any state or federal level in my community, representing my district. But it's not something that I talked about. But then after I was elected, I was sworn in January of 2023. October 7th happens several months later. And then anti-Semitism became more of a public issue. And I felt called upon to make that part of my work. And I think secondarily, part of my identity as a legislator. I thought it was important that people saw that there were Jewish people in the legislature. And so with some of my colleagues, I started to work on things like hosting survivors, and other Jewish-related work that was happening in the State House. And it was all that preceded the creation and the filing on the Senate side of the commission. But by the time that had happened, I already had a baseline of understanding of what the important impact could be of creating this special commission, and that was part of that work. But the reason I mention all of that is it was not kind of a thoughtful, deliberate thing that happened to become a legislator who worked on Jewish issues. It was more that this was just something that I could identify, as so many people out there have identified, as something that we were called upon to do because of the moment that we were living in. And so, yes, it happened exactly as you said. It got filed on the Senate side. I was one of a number of people. And in fact, what I specifically did is I wrote a white paper responding to the folks who were opposing the commission before it was created, not folks inside the State House, but outside groups. And through that, tried to help my colleagues understand what some of the criticisms were. And thankfully, and I'm not attributing this to my memo necessarily, but thankfully there was absolutely no hesitation on the House side that this was a good thing to do.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing to lift up if we're going to talk about the fact that there was opposition, and opposition that persisted throughout the process, that there was never a question of the Senate, the House, or the governor endorsing and getting behind the establishment of this commission, and that there's always been that unanimity of leadership on Beacon Hill on this issue.
Yes, and folks need to know that. Folks need to understand that, especially when people are paying a lot of attention to national news, and you may see a lot of examples of elected leaders who kind of go astray from causes that protect Jewish people. Here in the Commonwealth, there is a lot of agreement, and this special commission report is an excellent example of that.
So I very much appreciate the framing that you repositioned this in, that in the world after October 7th, you and your colleagues feeling called to be more publicly present as Jewish leaders. I still want to come back to the question of, as you took on the chair role, what you hope to achieve through this commission.
First, I started by listening, as I think everybody, should and usually does do. And as I started listening, I started to more fulsomely appreciate the diversity of perspectives that were out there. I was not a professional operative within Jewish life in Massachusetts or anywhere else. And so a lot of the things that you all have been working on for decades really new to me. And so a lot of this was just starting out by learning. But on a personal level, in some sense, as a political and policy level, it was clear to me, and it was clear to Senator Vilas, that there was one issue that we had to start with, and that was K through 12 education. This was happening right in the wake of what I call the Claudine Gay moment, and a lot of turmoil in higher education. But from our perspectives, and certainly what we were hearing from constituents, was that there was so much concern happening in our K through 12 schools, public and private. We felt like we needed to tackle that first. We also thought that if we start with an issue that involves children, it will humanize this a little bit, because so much of the bickering about anti-Semitism, and worse than bickering, I don't mean to minimize it, happens at the adult level. But what we thought we had to continually ground this conversation in is that this is in significant part about our children and our future, both their personal futures, but also as a society. And so we started with K through 12 education, and that was a way to start because there was quite a lot of engagement, and
it was definitely a bang.
Turned out a few months into it, a lot of public interest in the work we were doing.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly an element of it. First of all, I think wholly concurring that was strategically a place to start and really focus it on, both in terms of what certainly we and so many across the Commonwealth are hearing from people in communities as probably the place where for many, many families is most directly impacting their lives was what they were seeing for their kids. And as you note, is certainly the commission's work in this space put the commission on the national map at a certain level. People noticed and people paid attention to what was going on here in a way that they hadn't before.
Well, it was the first.
Yes. I don't want to spend too much time on the process, and I want to really focus on the findings and outcomes. But as you noted, we spent a considerable amount of time early in the process on K through 12. And I want to lift up and maybe take a minute or two just to talk about what the process was for the commission. As you noted at our final hearing in November, we had many, many hearings. We heard from many, many voices in terms of invited panels, public comment, written communication to the commission. I think you noted at the time that it was the most robust, both in time and volume, that any special commission has done, at least in recent Massachusetts history. So tell us a little bit about what you were hoping to achieve through that incredibly robust deliberative process, both on K through 12 and more broadly as we moved into other issues.
Part of it, and I think this certainly happened, was shining a light on the issue. And that happened through the process of having these hearings, over 60 hours of them across 16 hearings. And it also happened as a result, secondarily, of the journalism that occurred and of some of the activism that came out of the hearings. And so we were very intentional in having folks who we believed were going to talk about kind of some of the more mainstream views and the more bread and butter of, what I'd call it, combating anti-Semitism. We also heard from some heterodox thinkers about these issues. And I think one of the main reasons we wanted to do that is it was important for people to hear from the horse's mouth what some of, the gaslighting that was happening. And so we had, a few professors who, held certain views, conveyed certain opinions, which they're perfectly, it's within their permission,
within their right
to have, even though those views were, in my view, complete nonsense, completely debunked by their own data that they presented, and they were not happy when that was highlighted in the commission. But I think it was really eye-opening for people to see what folks were saying when you tried to raise up anti-Semitism and then respond to it. Because so much of the fear that's happening within communities, whether it's a school community, is a workplace community, is if somebody comes up with these crazy things when an issue of anti-Semitism gets raised, I'm not going to feel like I can say anything. I'm not going to know what to say. I'm going to just avoid it, right? We hear this again and again and again. It's just too controversial to talk about anti-Semitism. So we thought, all right, let's bring them in, right? The folks, and let's let them say their line, and we can respond. And I think what we have done through that is give a lot of confidence to the people who now feel like they can do that too, because we modeled it. We modeled those conversations and we didn't back down or flinch. That's on a process stage. We also gathered a lot of data and gathered it into one place and gathered a ton of public input, only over 200 people who came and testified before us. And all of that, and I won't get ahead of ourselves, but all of that got folded into the first comprehensive set of findings and recommendations on combating anti-Semitism in the state level, and one that I think is actually very different, and I would argue more specific and actionable than what we previously had on the national level.
I would certainly agree with that. And I think it was a powerful aspect both of the process and as we look at this as an outcome, to be able to say that any part of Massachusetts society that wanted to be heard before the commission was heard before the commission, and nobody was turned away because their views were, as you say, heterodox or orthodox, institutional, grassroots, and frankly, you didn't name it, also many times powerful, compelling firsthand experiences of what people were doing. We were hearing from parents, hearing from professionals, hearing from people in the medical industry, in the psychiatric industry, professionals, hearing from youth who had experienced things in their own school. So like all of that was part of the experience. And I wasn't really planning on going here today, but I think it's worth noting that for most of the members of the commission, a lot of this was new to them. We're not talking about like 19 members of the Jewish community who are accustomed to the conversations that we, as you say, like you're not part of the professional organizational world, we in the organizations may have been having at our tables. There were many people there who were not part of our community. Maybe we should say a little bit about who was at the table as commissioners so that people understand, and then as we move to like talk about the final report and the recommendations, where the buy-in is. And we should note, like the final report was endorsed unanimously by the members of the commission. So who was at the table and what credibility, what institutional representation, what parts of society were coming together to solve this, or to at least address this problem?
It was, in many respects, everyone you'd want if the goal is to create something robust, powerful, and that is going to be carried out. So we had appointees from the governor, in addition to the governor's own kind of free-form appointees. We had an appointee from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, which is under the executive branch, an appointee from the board, or the Department of Higher Education. We had District Attorney, DA Paul Tucker from Essex County, representing the District Attorneys Association. We had a police chief, Chief Tom Fowler, representing the Chiefs of Police Association. The Attorney General had one of her top deputies, Jamie Hoag, who was excellent, as they all were, as her appointee. We had two appointees from the Mass Municipal Association. And then we also had, and I'm skipping over a few folks, we had some Jewish professionals organizations that were appointed. We had the Superintendents Association. We had the executive director of the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination, MCAD. Who am I forgetting? I mean, it was an incredible group.
I think you got it there.
Yeah.
I hope I'm not forgetting somebody.
The point is, we are forgetting some people. The point is that this was a really robust group. That was all set out by statute. And I think that's why, getting further into your question, that's why the recommendations that are directed at state agencies, which are many but not all of the recommendations, are really teed up to be carried out and to be carried out quickly, because those agencies have had their hands on the pen of this. There is also a lot of, a weight at the more local school district level. When we have the Superintendents Association represented, we have the Mass Municipal Association. So all 351
and we should name, because not everybody is probably a nerd listening to this, that the Mass Municipal Association represents all the mayors, town supervisors, city councilors across the Commonwealth.
Yes. And so I think that because of the structure of this, because of the high profile nature of the appointees who incredibly came to every meeting. I mean, it wasn't just that we met more times and for a longer period of time and that this was more high profile. It's that these people came and they didn't just come and they contributed. So it was a really just incredible group.
And just so we make sure we don't forget anybody and have critique afterwards, we'll just also add that from the House and the Senate, both the majority and the minority had appointees. And so, as I said, I served on behalf of appointed by the Senate President. You were appointed by the Speaker of the House. There were others appointed by the President and the Speaker, but also by the Republican leaders. So that we had representation from both political parties on Beacon Hill as well, including your House colleague, Rep. Howard.
Yes, and as you said, it was unanimous.
Yes. So let's talk about the final report. I think all of that helps people understand what went into this, what you were bringing to this, and who was at the table. And now we have this document that was unanimously endorsed. And I want to talk a little about that so that people understand it. And we definitely will include in the show notes a link to the Commission's website so that people can read it for themselves. It's a remarkable document. It's one I'm very proud of personally. Before we get into specific findings and recommendations around K through 12, which you've already talked to how we approach that, higher ed, public safety, et cetera, I want to invite you to talk a little bit about a part of the document that I think you literally put pen to paper on, which was the Massachusetts way, and the prefatory statement about how this commission saw combating anti-Semitism in a way that was consistent with our values as a Commonwealth.
You know, it's funny. I get pins and needles just thinking about talking about this. And the reason is that, yes, I had my hands on the pen, but for those who are following closely the process, there were so many hands on the pen in the sense that there was so much input there. This was something that we really wordsmithed, and I'm so proud of the result. So folks really should go ahead and read it. But just to summarize, in Massachusetts, we have fancied ourselves as being on the vanguard of protecting civil liberties and protecting minorities. And sometimes we've lived up to that self-perception, and other times we haven't. But we thought that particularly with respect to anti-Semitism and the time that we're living in, we needed to do two things at the same time. And we thought the people of Massachusetts were capable of doing two things at the same time. One is to jealously protect the ability of the Jewish people to be included, to be treated fairly, to not be discriminated against, and to be safe. And by the same token, not to be gaslit when they raised their legitimate concerns about what everyone who is paying any attention and is advocating in good faith would acknowledge is a rising and very serious issue. And at the same time, we need to protect people's right to say things that are lawful but awful, right? We have a right to free speech. Germany deals with it differently, right? They have things that are illegal to say, even to say. And that's, in part because of their history and their approach. That's not how we do it in the United States, certainly not how we do it in Massachusetts. And we understand as Jewish people and as people of Massachusetts that narrow nationalisms, quote unquote, don't end well for minorities, and they definitely don't end well for the Jews. And so we're in the situation where folks who want to gaslight efforts to combat anti-Semitism are in some cases getting quite a bit of traction by marrying up efforts, good faith efforts to address anti-Semitism with certain political actors that they don't like, and in particular, the federal government. At the same time, we see that some actions of the federal government are poor policy choices and things that don't, in the long run or the short term, help Jews, and in some cases, harm Jews. And so we needed to balance all of that and get it right down the middle. And so that's what we were talking about when it came to the Massachusetts way. It's that we're going to not flinch when it comes to supporting and protecting our Jewish people. And we're going to make sure that we don't chip away at the very civil liberties that have made Jewish people safe and able to thrive in democratic countries.
That's well said. And with all due respect, you may be acknowledging the collective effort around that, but you definitely led the way in shaping that section of the report. And so thank you. Let's talk about some of the specific recommendations. And why don't we start with K through 12? And again, people should read the whole thing. There's a lot there. It's how many pages long, this document?
Over 60.
Over 60. So there's a lot in there. Anything in the K through 12 findings and recommendations that you particularly want to lift up, bring people's attention to, and are proud of?
I would say the
proud of?
ethos of this entire report, including and perhaps especially the K through 12 section, is that Jews count. So in the 2020-2021 era, many educational institutions, including K through 12 institutions, built up an entire infrastructure around anti-discrimination, bias, anti-hate, how we deal with these issues, how we train people to properly respond to these issues, which is great, which should have happened, which many groups are benefiting. I'd argue the whole society is benefiting from a lot of that. And they left out the Jews. And so a lot of this report is about going back and fixing that. In the K through 12 space in particular, we say, look, in those programs that you have, you need to include certain things about teaching about who the Jewish people are and that you're not allowed to be anti-Semitic. You're not allowed to do anti-Semitic things. And here are some ways to both prevent that and also ensure a smooth process. Over 80% of our recommendations, and I think this is particularly true about the K through 12 space, are not specifically about anti-Semitism. They're about all forms of hate, discrimination, and bias. But we know statistically that these issues and the shortcomings disproportionately affect Jewish people. So what you will see in there is, for example, very specific, not only guidance, but examples of Massachusetts institutions that have good reporting procedures that are public, that protect whistleblowers, that are safe, that are clear, that are transparent, and that are easy to follow along with. And so we have actually included citations to school districts that are doing aspects of that well. We have a lot in there about how you respond and how the school leadership responds when an incident does occur, including language that's used. And it's fairly prescriptive because we want to make sure that we give people enough guidance. So those are some of the things that I would say about K through 12 education.
And it's important to note both what you said about the overwhelming percentage of the recommendations are about broader interventions in combating bias and hate. And as was noted since the very first hearing, the work of this commission was one that understood that anti-Semitism is a unique form of bias that needs to be understood as itself, as a particular experience, and that the only way to combat it was with a broader understanding of the ways in which hate, violence, bigotry show up and represent themselves in our society and need to be fought collectively as well.
Yes.
Higher education. Anything there that you want to lift up and note? And we're going to move in a few minutes. We're going to talk about the road forward. So I'm really thinking about what recommendations you're specifically looking at here.
So I think that we noticed that there was a ton of positive movement that happened since the Claudine Gay movement moment, right? We were seeing, and this was part of our strategy actually with the cadence of the commission, we had early signs that our higher ed institutions were improving. And we thought, okay, let's wait a little bit because we're going to see a lot more positive examples. And so we started to see a lot more robust activity around how a student can report an incident of hate, trainings that were happening for faculty, staff, and students that included anti-Semitism, whereas many of them before did not, making sure that there was a point person to protect state and federal rights as it had to do with discrimination. And that's something that we could potentially see legislation on in the future. And so basically, what was so great about the higher ed portion is that a lot of our schools, including some of our most prominent schools, were already moving in the direction that we wanted them to move. And so in our report, if anyone goes and reads our report, you'll see a number of schools and examples that are doing the right thing on that. And then there's some more specific guidance around masking policies, protest policies, things like that, that we think, again, schools are moving in the right direction on that. And just the consistent enforcement and that reminder that when it comes to anti-Semitism, that's also a form of hate and bias that has to be addressed.
And the other major section within the report in terms of findings and recommendations has to do with public safety and law enforcement. We spent some time there. I know we heard some things about reporting and ways in which reporting can be improved. and about interventions that the Commonwealth was already taking. We heard about some programs, including some that you've been involved with as a legislator, even before the commission was established. For example, nonprofit security. Anything there that you want to lift up by way of recommendations?
I think people should know that the HEART unit, which is a hate crimes unit that the governor Healy stood up, is really promising. And so we had some ideas on further supporting and expanding that to ensure that we have accurate data and that people are trained in responding and recognizing hate crimes. Critical. We've got a long way to go, but I think that our law enforcement partners, and we learned this through the process of our commission, are very committed, very engaged in advancing that. And the other I'd say, and it is, unfortunately so timely, so prevalent, is the nonprofit security grants. And one of the benefits of this special commission is it gave us the ability, the platform to really raise that up as an issue that needs to be the subject of continued focus and support in the legislative budget process.
So let's talk about the moving forward. And I think we've already started to, get into this a little bit. How does this report inform the work moving forward in the legislature, in the various state agencies and departments that were represented, and beyond that in the Commonwealth?
In some sense, I wish we had started here because there may be some people who weren't able to make it all the way through this podcast. I think the most, in some ways, difficult thing for people to hear, and also the most important thing for them to understand, is that this document will live and have life through the grassroots efforts of Jewish people in Massachusetts, first and foremost. That's my personal view. Is that we have to start by standing up for ourselves. This is certainly a document that has been collaborated upon by Jewish and non-Jewish people, Jewish and non-Jewish leaders. But in terms of giving this thing life, it is going to have to be Jewish individuals and communities and Jewish organizations like the JCRC and others that demand adherence. Okay, I could go out and pass, and the governor could sign into law 20 laws tomorrow that reflected what's in this report. It will not make a difference, in my personal view, if we don't have Jews standing up for Jews. That's number one. And what we have done here is provide a goalpost or a lodestar, something that Jewish people can point to and say, this has the imprimatur of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. If you, superintendent, are not doing this in response or in preparation for an incident of anti-Semitism, we need to have an explanation of that. And I can tell you with 101% confidence that that is already happening and it is already working. And the reason that we did a preliminary report on K through 12 education back over the summer, something that was unusual for special commissions to do as a matter of procedure, is because we wanted to make sure not just that the superintendents or the teachers or the school boards had this in hand, but that the community had it in hand and could bring it. And I am already seeing and have, just derived so much confidence and professional satisfaction and gratitude from the fact that many school districts are making changes already in accordance with our recommendations, with literally no forcing from the state. Okay? It's the forcing is happening, or the encouraging is happening from the people on the ground who have taken our document and brought it to their school boards or brought it to their school committees or their employers and said, this is what we need to do.
And I want to lift this up and stay here for a minute because it's something I've been talking about with a lot of folks. I agree with you 100%. And one of the things that we and other organizations, including those who were represented on the commission and those who weren't, are we all creating our sort of roadmaps for how this informs our own advocacy, our own work. And certainly in the space of K through 12, we as an organization, as a network of organizations, are already sitting down with the Department of Education to talk about implementation, to support their efforts, which they've publicly committed, not only to implementing this, but also the Commissioner of Education, I think in his very first hearing since he was appointed last summer, came before the commission and committed to adding staff for the implementation.
Yes.
And there's a second layer down, which you lifted up, and I think we really want to spend time with. There's like, we'll be providing some tools and creating some toolkits for how superintendents might do the work, or for how parents might approach the superintendents. But parents, people town by town across the Commonwealth, you can be going to your superintendent of schools, you can be going to your school board and saying, here's a report from the state that outlines specific recommendations for interventions in training, reporting, classroom education about Jewish experience that have been endorsed by the governor, the attorney general, the speaker of the House, the Senate president, and on and on and on, as well as by the Association of Superintendents. How can we, local members of the community, work with you, our school board, our superintendent, our principal, to implement them? And you shouldn't have to wait for legislation, and we shouldn't have to wait for organizations downtown like JCRC, although we're certainly here to support that work, to go out there and do that work. And I think you've been saying this throughout the process, that we as a Jewish community at every level of the community need to lead in engaging with people on this.
I agree.
Okay. I know you do, because I've heard you talk about it. And we've done some panels in some school districts where you've talked about this.
And that isn't all. I start there because I think it's the thing that people need to hear.
Yeah.
But it's not all. And we know, I feel very confident, we already see it happening, that, as we said before, the state apparatus is coming around to doing the things that we recommend. But that's not in everybody's immediate control. What isn't in your immediate control is what you do in your community, what you advocate for in your community.
So let's talk a little bit about what you, no longer chair, but Rep. Cataldo, or you're together with some of your colleagues, are looking at as we move forward with implementation. Are there things that we should be keeping an eye out for how the legislature continues to engage on combating anti-Semitism? Are there things that we, and I don't just mean we, JCRC, but we collectively as a community, should be thinking about bringing to the attention in all the ways that we engage with our representatives on Beacon Hill?
Yes, and I would say, we're in probably the very nascent stage of some of those conversations, because I do think that it's appropriate, given how much support this has had in a public way, to see how things unfold, to make sure that we're using our political capital in a very targeted way to do things that the communities aren't going to do themselves. And that's part of what we were trying to figure out as a commission, and there's a little bit more learning to happen there. And I'll give you one example, which is that you and others worked very hard to get enacted a genocide education law. And through the work of the commission, we learned and made very public some of the questions that have occurred with respect to implementation. And we learned that only 76% of schools surveyed by DESE, and you can, I think, fairly presume that this is going to be a higher number.
These are the schools that actually responded.
These are the ones who actually responded to the survey. Only 76% are actually carrying out the statutory mandate of teaching a required course in genocide education. And of those, only about 89% are teaching about the Holocaust. Think about it. That's ridiculous. And so just to loop back, it's a point on this issue of the law can't do everything, right? If you don't have the political will, if you don't have the moral clarity as a leader of a school district to make sure that kids are learning about what genocide and the Holocaust is, I mean, forget about the moral clarity part. Just your, to me, raises major questions about your pedagogical and curricular approach if you don't teach the Holocaust as part of an American history class. But that's just me. So I think we're going to need to take another look at that. There's a whole question that relates very much to anti-Semitism in Massachusetts of local versus state control, and what happens when, some things go off the rails in particular districts, and what the state's role in that. But I think one place that we have to take a really strong look at is, are our students, during an era of more disinformation about the Holocaust, Holocaust denial, and all sorts of other things, are they learning really about the Holocaust? And are they using that as an opportunity to learn about what anti-Semitism actually is? Because those two things don't always go hand in hand.
Right.
And so I think, we're going to take a real close look at that. We're also going to take another look at how fast is this improvement that I was just describing happening at the higher ed level? And are all of our institutions really appointing someone to handle the state and federal complaints that come in? Are there, really clear guidelines at schools and procedures for, making sure that every student is safe and can learn? Again, I'm encouraged, but we're going to be keeping a very close eye on that.
And on that note, just one final word in the few moments we have left, because we really started this conversation in part talking about our allies beyond the Jewish community. Is there anything that you would say to those of our allies who are listening today about their role in the implementation of this work?
Yeah, I would say check in with your Jewish people. Check in with them. See how they're actually doing. And I think that when you do that, you're going to learn a lot. You might be pleasantly surprised in some respects. I think you'll gain a lot of guidance in how to talk about these issues, when to talk about them, when not to talk about them. I would say they should follow you on social media, honestly. And I do actually say that to people. Sometimes people reach out to me and I say, check with Jeremy. But you need to have someone that you trust who is Jewish. I think, fortunately, I am one of those people for a lot of my colleagues in the legislature. So I would say, first of all, ask. And second of all, show up in a public way. Go to one of these menorah lightings. Just stop by. You will be amazed at how much the Jewish people will appreciate it. I was at a rally in Concord, the first of its kind. I think I can 100% assure you the first of its kind for Jews in Concord and Carlisle. The Jews in Concord and Carlisle aren't necessarily very public about their Judaism. Well over 200 people. And there was a non-Jewish school committee member there, happened to be a black man who cared a lot about these issues and had done a lot of work on them. And people really appreciated that he showed up to that, just that he was there. I don't think he was on the speaking roster. I spoke first and then had to leave. People really appreciate this, whether you're an elected leader or whether you're not. Just the fact that you go is, if you want to feel good about yourself that day, that's a good way to do it.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's an excellent place to wrap up. And I just want to, as a final note, you talked about how Jews count and being an important message of this. I also think, in a very similar vein, I would say Jews belonging. And one of the things that I'm most proud of about this commission, and I think this is particularly relevant in this moment where we have heard from so many about how Jews are being, to your frame, gaslit, or Jews are being told, check part of your Jewish identity to belong in this space, is that this question of where Jews belong in our society, it is unfortunately become a question in this moment for a lot of us. And nothing could be more clear than the act of having this commission and a clear outcome, the final report, the roadmap supported across the board by our state leadership, that at least here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, our state leadership, the folks on Beacon Hill who matter, are saying Jews belong, and we're prepared to get behind a plan that conveys that every single day. So this is an incredibly powerful document. It's a very powerful process. And I will say to you, you should be very proud of what you've achieved. I am proud to have been a part of it with you. And to a point in your introduction, our community, for all of us, the question, maybe not for those of us who are professionally Jewish day in and day out, whatever that means, is very much one of, in the post-October 7th world, how do people in all professions and in all places in life who maybe were there for all sorts of reasons have chosen to bring their Judaism into their public leadership in all sorts of ways. And you've done that in a profound and powerful way, which all of us are very fortunate to have you as a leader, not just for the Jewish community and not just for the people of Concord, but for the entire Commonwealth. So thank you, Simon. Thank you for being on the podcast. And I hope we're going to get you back here sometime in the future to talk about some of the other work you're focused on.
It's been awesome to work with you, Jeremy. Thank you so much. And just, a plug for, we are during Hanukkah right now. And if people are like feeling down or feeling bad or feeling sorry for themselves, they should just read the story of Hanukkah. And then I think that puts into context, where we are now as a people, and hopefully gives a little bit of inspiration to lean into the Jewishness that all of us ought to be, in my view, tapping into at this moment in time.
Well said. Thank you.